The next elections are set for October 21st, 2019. I'm Chad Groening.
An Alabama university has earned a free speech watchdog group's lowest rating, thanks to the school's vague and unconstitutional ban on a type of communication. Bob Kellogg has more.
Laura Belts of the Foundation for Individual Rights in Education says West Alabama University has described their ban on harsh text messages as a guard against cyberbullying. She says the policy is not only too vague, but it's also unenforceable.
So students really have no idea what could be punished as cyberbullying or cyber harassment, and they're forced to look at these examples and think, well, just about anything could be a harsh text message, and so they're likely to self-censor and stay away from anything controversial.
Besides being unenforceable, students don't know what kind of punishment they may be subject to if somebody complains about a text message they've sent.
But our concern is that students reading this policy are going to see it and assume that it can be enforced, and so it'll have a chilling effect on their expression.
Belts says because of this bad policy, Fire has given the school their lowest free speech rating, which is a red light rating. I'm Bob Kellogg.
And finally, the Kellogg Company is voluntarily recalling some of its Honey Smacks cereal after salmonella infected 73 people in 31 states. American Family News is online at onenewsnow.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download the One News Now mobile app. I'm Rusty Pugh.
My name's Shane. Abusing alcohol and drugs made me so hopeless I wanted to end my life. Thankfully, Teen Challenge showed me how to start my life all over again without drugs.
If you know an adult or teenager who's struggling with a chemical addiction, Teen Challenge can help. Call us today at 417-581-2181 or reach us online at teenchallengeusa.com. This is Urban Family Talk.
Welcome to Stacy on the Right with your host, Stacy Washington.
You're up for re-election, as you're saying, in 2018. Do you believe that the Democratic Party is going to win control of either House of Congress in the midterms? And how do you make that assessment?
So, look, you probably need a pundit for this one. I really, really want us to do that. I'm going to work really, really hard to help make that happen, and I run every day filled with terror that it won't. Because if Donald Trump remains in control of the House and the Senate, and the Republicans won't stop him, I don't know what happens in the next 2 years. But I think the Democrats have got a really terrific chance.
Oh, my goodness. Welcome to the show. Hey, happy Friday to you. It's actual Friday, not Friday Eve like yesterday. And we have a jam-packed show for you. Welcome to the program. I'm Stacy Washington, host of Stacy on the Right here on American Family Radio and Urban Family Talk. Go to urbanfamilytalk.com to find the podcasts and articles and polls. And you can sign up for our conference, which is this August 17th and 18th, where we'll have a fantastic bevy of speakers that will encourage you in working with your family, growing your faith, and following God's word and what he has for us, the blessings that he has for us in being obedient, in having successful families and successful marriages. So I'll be speaking at that conference, as well as Will and Miki Addison, who are hosts of Airing the Addisons, Lonnie Poindexter, Pastor Joseph Parker, and of course, Abraham Hamilton III. So you'll have an opportunity to interact with us, and it'll be a really wonderful time. So register for that conference at urbanfamilytalk.com. And I want to give you a rundown who's on the show today. Well, we're going to be speaking with Remso Martinez. He's going to come on and talk about his book, Stay Away from the Libertarians. Now, you guys know I have a couple problems with the libertarian philosophy of governance. Not all of it. I mean, some of it is actually really pro-limited government, pro-constitution, and some of it sounds a lot like anarchy. So he'll be explaining his philosophy about libertarianism to us in the first hour. And in the second hour, we have David Almasi, he's the president of National Center. National Center is the parent organization for Project 21. I'm on the advisory council as a co-chair. And so David's going to come on today and talk to us about a little dust-up between himself and a CEO of a major corporation. in the work that they do at National Center for the Free Enterprise Project, which is exciting and fun and pro-liberty. And so we'll be talking to him about that. What you just heard was Elizabeth Warren, and she says she's filled with terror about the midterm elections because you just can't turn out voters to get them to reauthorize and recommit themselves to failed policies. If you don't make them think it's life or death, the end of the republic, the end of life as they know it, the cattle cars are just around the bend. You have to really, really convince people that their lives are in danger, because otherwise they'll be too busy enjoying the extra money that's in their paychecks from the tax reform, the extra bonuses from the lower business tax rate, the almost full employment. There's a sense of excitement about the economy. Confidence in the economy is at record highs. Unemployment is at record lows, 44-year lows. And whatever people think about President Trump, they have to attribute these changes, the fewer regulations, even savings in government. We're actually seeing government spending on the whole trending downward, not as much as we'd like, but any change to less is something to be applauded. And all of those things are happening under President Donald Trump. And we were told, especially blacks, women, Jews, people who are involved in same-sex attraction, all were told that we would be shipped off out of the country or sent to concentration camps. It's not happening. So I found that clip to be a little comical, especially on a Friday. Now, this is a heavy news day. Yesterday, the Department of Justice issued their Inspector General report. Mr. Horowitz did not go as far as I would have liked him to, but maybe because he felt the facts spoke for themselves. A number of text messages between Peter Strzok and Lisa Page have come to the fore and have really, really, really made it clear to us that there are no nonpartisans in the FBI, as much as we would love to think that there are. And I want to make the distinction in this particular instance. When I say the FBI, I should be more specific. I'm talking about the leadership that's in Washington, D.C., and the people who are working on the Mueller investigation into Russian collusion on the part of the Trump campaign, and those who were working on the Hillary Clinton email investigation. And the reason I say that is because there are 37,000 employees of the FBI, I believe, was shared on one of the news organizations. So there have to be many FBI employees who are either kind of apolitical because they really are about the job, and there have to be a lot of them that are Republicans or conservatives or what have you. But Mark Levin made a point on Fox News that I thought was so stunning. And I believe, facts that under the radar, you know them, you realize them, but you don't grasp them. You don't kind of take charge of those facts. And sometimes it takes someone else who's very astute and analytical to point those things out. And when I was listening to Mark Levin talking about this salient point, it was just like light bulbs and little fireworks and all kinds of things were just popping off, because it makes so much sense once you listen to the point that he's making. All of the other pieces then begin to have a lot more clarity. And the other pieces that I'm talking about are the fact that no one seemed to think it was a big deal that they were texting on government devices about how they wanted Donald Trump to lose the election and how they were going to fix it so that he would. None of them seemed to think it was odd that they were having these relationships on the job, and that part and parcel to the relationships were these. It was as if they were on some kind of a mission. You guys might remember the funny times we've had over the course of the past few months talking about Peter Strzok and Lisa Page, and they're in the black Escalade, and they're like Jason Bourne and Mrs. Jason Bourne, and they're, rolling around the country and coming to abrupt stops and, tumbling out of the vehicle with their FBI vests on, and they're like, clearing corners and stuff with their high-capacity P90Xs or whatever, and they're doing all of that, and the music is playing in the background in their heads, and they're saving the republic. They're rescuing America. And that's what they thought they were doing, rescuing America from Donald Trump. Never mind the fact that, well over 60 million people voted for Donald Trump, and that the country is increasingly divided just down the middle, depending on the issue. There are some issues where there's well over 60% of Americans believe one thing as opposed to the other side. But generally speaking, this election kind of boiled down to who was willing to work harder, and Donald Trump worked harder in the states that mattered for the Electoral College, and that's how the decision is decided. So anyway, Mark Levin's on, he's on TV with Sean Hannity. He's talking about how he's got it printed out there in front of him in the interview. And it's this big, thick ream of papers, the entire report. And he says, you know, he's had time to look through it and really digest it. And what he notices about the text messages is that they're all on one side. It's number 5.
Tell you what I see as I went through this major report here. I see several things. Number one, out of all the texts, all the documents, all the emails that have been reviewed, you know what's interesting, Sean? There's not a single pro-Trump text. There's not a single anti-Hillary text. There's not a single pro-Trump senior FBI official. There's not a single anti-Hillary FBI official. This was a cabal. And these people had as their purpose to interfere with a presidential election. They interfered with this presidential election worse than the Russians could have ever dreamed of. And I am no fan of Vladimir Putin and the Russians, let me tell you that. James Comey's FBI, there was collusion. The media in this report, appalling, giving gifts and tickets to sporting events and golf outings in exchange apparently for leaks. You have a culture of leaks at the FBI. The buck stops with Comey. This is Comey. Comey, disgraced. McCabe, criminal referrals. Have you ever heard of an FBI like this? You have obstruction. Jim Comey spent months trying to make sure that Hillary Clinton was protected. You know why? Because if they had impaneled a federal grand jury and played by the book, she would have been indicted. And the Democrat Party would have had to have another convention and find another candidate. They couldn't allow that. They had to defeat Trump.
So there's a lot to digest there. But the most important thing is what he said first, which is if there were text messages present, let's just play what if for 5 seconds here. Let's say the IG report showed text messages of people who were equally as interested in electing Donald Trump, who were willing to subvert the Russian investigation in order to, or not to elect him, because the Russia investigation that came about after he was already inaugurated. Let's say that they found text messages that showed that people who were working on the investigation were actively working to exonerate Donald Trump, regardless of the information that they were getting in the investigation. That would be a stunning revelation that CNN and MSNBC would pick up and they would run with it 24 hours a day. They would replay it. They would make visuals. They would find people that they could interview who have experience in the FBI but are retired. They would talk about how it's a blow to the Constitution, a blow to democracy, that career appointees showing that kind of partisanship is a breakdown in the fabric of America's, very essence of America, that the government was broken down, that the public's trust was not just abused, but obliterated. Can you imagine the kinds of panels they would have on that kind of information? But that's not what they found. In their review of millions of electronic communications between a number of individuals, they actually located 5 additional FBI agents who were also materially involved in trying to subvert and lessen the impact of the email investigation into Hillary Clinton's private server and direct more energy towards the Russia collusion investigation. Even one of the texts for one of the unnamed agents says, "I'm afraid I'm not finding anything. This looks like a big nothing burger, but we have to go on." In other words, this is where we're putting all of our energy, because this is all that we care about, is making sure that this man can't continue to govern. They were so convinced that Hillary was going to win that they really were hinging everything on that. So when the loss occurred, there's just so many images. If you haven't been on Twitter, you don't have to be an actual Twitter user to go on and peruse tweets. Just go on and type in text or search the word FBI agent text or Peter Strzok text, and you'll see screen grabs from the actual DOJ IG report where after they read the text messages, of course, they printed them out and they interviewed the agents who'd sent the messages. And they asked them, what were you thinking, first of all, sending these kinds of very partisan, they're damaging to the reputation of the FBI and to your work. They call your work into question. And they admitted, we didn't think the FBI was archiving text messages. We just didn't think these would ever be viewed by anyone else. The other thing is they worked in close proximity with other agents, and they didn't have the space to have these kinds of, like, you know, you're at work and you stand up and you go over the cubicle and you're like, but did you hear, or can you believe, that type of thing. They couldn't do it because they were working in such tight quarters. There were other times where they had a little bit of space, but if they wanted to have a private phone call, it was just impossible to do so because they did not have private offices. So they used the text messages as a way to communicate and to kind of, you know, rub each other's shoulders, if you will, or the metaphorical, you know, side hug for someone who's really discouraged after their candidate lost. But where it gets a little hazy is when they say things like Peter Strzok said, so Lisa Page says, I thought you told me this couldn't happen. In other words, you told me Donald Trump couldn't be elected. And then he says, I know, I feel so responsible. I can't believe that this is what's happened. And remember, Lisa Page was an attorney working for the FBI, where Peter Strzok was an actual agent. And so it's as if he's taken responsibility for somehow not orchestrating the email investigation in such a way that it would lead to the result that they were looking for. And this is all, I'm telling you, this is all within the context of the Federal Bureau of Investigations. Their job is to prosecute criminals. They investigate and prosecute. They bring these findings of their investigations to the Department of Justice, who then, you know, they go forward and file charges and indict, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, can it be any worse? The only thing they didn't do, we don't find evidence of anybody physically harming anyone or plotting to, you know, harm anyone physically. But everything else, yeah, they're pretty guilty of it. So it's interesting to see that the DOJ IG report doesn't come back with like this hammer designation of they were guilty, they were biased, but every bit of information inside the report points to bias and to activities that were based on assumptions that, when they didn't come true, activated these people to begin to actually work against the sitting president of the United States. Someone's got to be punished. This can't be the end. Now, there are 2 more IG reports coming. They're not finished. But wow. So we have more on that. But up next, we have Remso Martinez. He's going to join us to talk about his new book. Stay there.
Hi, I'm Will Addison.
And I'm Miki Addison of Aaron the Addisons on Urban Family Talk. Family is so important to everything. I mean, think about it. Right after God created Adam, he made family by creating Eve as his wife.
We'd like to invite you to the Marriage, Family, and Life Conference this summer. We'll have a full slate of experts to help encourage and equip the body of Christ to fight for the restoration of the family.
Our speakers include Ryan Baumberger of the Radiance Foundation, Dr. Clarence Schuler of Building Lasting Relationships, Abraham Hamilton III, Pastor Bert Harper and his wife Jan, and more.
We'll even be there.
The Marriage, Family, and Life Conference will be Friday and Saturday, August 17th and 18th at Hope Church in Tupelo, Mississippi. Come help us fight back against the enemy's direct attack on marriage and family. That's the Marriage, Family, and Life Conference, put on by Urban Family Communications, a division of the American Family Association. You can learn more and register at urbanfamilytalk.com.
Hi, I'm Crawford Loritz with a legacy moment. Leonard Scott is a trusted friend and colleague. For years, he served as my executive assistant. His loyalty and commitment to me and what God has called us to do is humbling. If you would look up servant in the dictionary, you would find a picture of the guy we affectionately call Scotty there. That's Leonard Scott. Many times he went beyond the call of duty to make sure I had what I needed or to relieve me of some of the pressures associated with my ministry. I am humbled and I appreciate and honor the sacrifice and commitment of this servant of the Lord. In 2 Samuel chapter 23, there's an account of some guys, kind of like loyal staff members, who made a great sacrifice for David. Verse 15 says, "And David had a craving and said, 'Oh, that someone would give me water to drink from the well of Bethlehem, which is by the gate.' So the 3 mighty men broke through the camp of the Philistines and drew water from the well of Bethlehem, which was by the gate, and took it and brought it to David. Nevertheless, he would not drink it, but poured it out to the Lord. And he said, Be it far from me, O Lord, that I should do this. Shall I drink the blood of men who went in jeopardy of their lives? Therefore he would not drink it. These things the three mighty men did. Notice, they took the initiative in fulfilling a desire. Secondly, their active service became an opportunity for worship. Then number 3, he valued and understood the price of their service. Well, here's what I want you to remember today. Don't take for granted those who sacrifice in order to meet your needs and to minister to you. Why don't you do something special to honor them?
Legacy Moment is a production of Moody Radio, a ministry of Moody Global Ministries.
Welcome back to Stacy on the Right on Urban Family Talk.
Welcome back to the show. Thanks for being with us today at Stacy on the Right on Twitter and Instagram, and StacyOnTheRight.com is where you can subscribe to my blog and get the once-a-week newsletter with all the cool stuff in it. It's my pleasure to welcome Remso Martinez, journalist, political commentator, and author of Stay Away from the Libertarians. Remso, thanks for joining in today.
Stacy, thank you so much for having me on. It's a pleasure to be here.
Fantastic. So let's talk about this book, Stay Away from the Libertarians. Your blurb says, why do people hate libertarians? One part of America calls them soulless robber barons who want to stick children back in factories, and other part thinks they're drugged up anarchists. Who are they?
Yeah, I kind of get straight to the point there, don't I?
Yeah.
It's a stereotype that, is split in so many different directions. I mean, libertarianism in America right now is such a schizophrenic ideology. And I could go on for probably hours describing the different things that people have told me they thought libertarians were. But, the answer was always this. Libertarians are your neighbors. They're your friends. They're your family. They're your coworkers. They're just everyday people, except they have this radical notion that you shouldn't hurt people, you shouldn't take their stuff, and you shouldn't use government as a violent middleman. So while I knew this answer, and I knew many other people knew this answer, there's never necessarily been, a common defense of not necessarily the ideas of libertarianism, but an understanding of who libertarians are and why they come to the conclusions they do. And that's what I tried to achieve through my book.
Okay, so what would be the difference, the main difference, if you had to explain to someone and you don't, like your kind of elevator pitch for the main difference between libertarianism and conservatism?
Well, I really do think it comes down to this. Personally, I am very socially conservative in my life, but, I take more of a radical approach to the idea of private contracts and private association. When we look back at the last couple of years, gay marriage is no longer a big topic, but I wasn't necessarily pro-gay marriage. I wasn't against it. In fact, I took the concept a little bit farther than most would. I said, why is government in the marriage business? Because if we really want to focus on, preserving our churches, preserving our religious liberty, the last thing we want is to ever get the government involved in that. Let your church decide who can get married. When you go ahead and you become part of a congregation or another religion, you're entering that upon voluntary association. And I think when it comes to conservatives, we're so, and I do consider myself as part of the conservative movement because I think a lot of libertarians have a lot to contribute to that. It seems that, conservatives, they want to legislate a lot of things. And it's like, well, what you're doing is you're trying to, prevent something from happening. But whenever you get government involved, when you get the bureaucrats and the regulators and the politicians involved, good intentions go sour very fast. And I think libertarians are a lot more hesitant to use government to try and influence our society and our culture than most conservatives are.
Sure. So I've had quite a few really stimulating conversations with people who are libertarians. They're usually on the younger side. The ones who are older are much more likely to be conscientious objectors, that type of thing. But what I found with younger conservatives is that they actually are really liberal socially, but they're conservative fiscally, and they believe the government is too large and they want to be left alone. And so it makes them kind of it's like they don't really slot in with conservatives, but they definitely aren't liberals. They're more like classical liberals in some ways, but in other ways it's just a really different belief system. But one of the things I've noticed about some libertarians that I've met here locally in Missouri is that they tend not to believe in sovereignty as it pertains to maintaining a border, using E-Verify, things like that are really detrimental to the livelihood of people who are already here, who are citizens, and who are tax-paying Americans who deserve to be protected by our federal government in the enumerated powers, one of which is that the government is supposed to maintain our defense and secure Americans' liberty by not having foreigners as invaders. Where do you come down on that?
You bring up a lot of good points. I'm going to try my best to cover each of them. The first thing you brought up is something I totally understand. It's this notion that a lot of younger millennial conservatives are more socially liberal. I would disagree with that statement, only because when we look at modern-day liberals, when they go ahead and they put out their progressive ideas, they are forcing you to bake the cake. They're forcing you to love people you might not love. They're forcing you to adopt something. I think when it comes to libertarians, I mean, I agree with you. We do take a lot more of a classical liberal approach. It's not that I necessarily want you to accept something. It's that I really don't want to have the government take an opinion on that. When we go ahead and look at the situation of borders, and this is something I cover towards the latter end of my book, it's a split issue. There are many libertarians who believe in a free and unfettered right to movement, and that sounds great on the white paper. And I do kind of give out that argument there, and then I go ahead and refute it, because there are folks like me that believe, how can you protect the individual liberty of a country and individual liberty throughout all of the citizens if you don't protect your border? And I'm one of the libertarians that says, you can't have a society that protects freedom if you're not protecting the right to, have people defend their property. Because if we don't know who's coming in, then that's a giant threat. And when we go ahead and look at what when we distill down the role of government, what is that? It's to protect the people, and I believe a border is part of that. Well, if you verify, and coming from a border state, I grew up in a town called Sierra Vista, Arizona. You could spit off my front porch and hit Mexico. The problem with E-Verify was that it was done in a way which caused a lot of problems. And in a sense, what it did was it really forced a lot of businesses to comply with law enforcement. It essentially militarized businesses. And the thing is, if a private business wants to hire somebody that's a day laborer, and they're already here, as long as they're making sure that they're, up with their visa and they're following the laws and they get a permit, that's not the problem. The problem is that, what you had things like SB 1070 come out back in about 2011, 2010. And that caused a lot more issues, because what we did was we tried to create all these laws to enforce immigration, but nobody understood what was going on, and people were enforcing some things and not enforcing others. The biggest problem that I think a lot of conservatives don't understand is that what's the big source of people wanting to come here? We have a giant welfare state. And the problem with a lot of open borders libertarians, they don't understand that, people work off incentives. If I know I can come here and I could bring my wife and children and she could bring her family, and I'll go ahead and grab a few other people along the way, then we can go ahead and go to hospitals which the taxpayers have to pay for, and then we have to go on the dole and everything else. The welfare state, in the way that the Democrats have really tried to establish it, incentivizes illegal activity. And that's, it just comes down to this. It's a split issue. You either believe in, the unfettered free movement of people, or you believe that in order to protect society, you have to protect the borders. And, I'm on the other end of that. You can't have a country if you don't defend your borders, and there are others that side on the other thing. So it's an issue that, libertarians have never come to a conclusion on. And that's, only one of the many things they don't agree on. I'm a pro-life libertarian. I believe that you don't have liberty itself if you're not even allowed to live. And then you have others that say, well, shouldn't a woman own her body? I would argue, doesn't that child inside the woman have the right to live?
Well, they own their own body.
What we do is we create two separate classes of people.
Yeah, the baby actually owns their own body. Once they become even that little tiny, what people on the left call clump of cells, that little clump of cells owns its own body. It may be inside of the mom, but that's a temporary condition that once rectified, you wouldn't say you can kill that infant because the mom finds the infant too convenient. No, there are other ways of handling that situation. And I think it's really illogical the way we look at unborn children as basically property of the mothers who are carrying them, not really owning them. I agree with you on that, but I wonder. So I honestly, after speaking with, I feel like maybe I've spoken with 100 libertarians individually over the course of the time that I've gone to conferences, and every time I meet a libertarian, I hear something from them that I find thoughtfully stimulating, and there's a lot of information that libertarians really study up on and bring with them to conversations that I think is valuable to policy discussions. I actually think the best situation we can have is one where libertarians are contributing to our policy ideas, because I'm not a libertarian, but I know there are ways of turning a problem around that conservatives, we don't naturally bend in that direction, and libertarians often do. There's a lot of creativity there. And so I would love to see more interaction between libertarians and conservatives on how to solve problems, especially the ones that are kind of intractable, that we could possibly be together on those and beat back the Democrats who are, it feels as if the Democratic Party is really in the business of tearing down any chance to solve a problem, like the problem we're having with school shootings, the problem with our border, the problem with us aborting 950,000 babies a year, and what that does to our population rate and what that does to the women who have the abortions. And so there are a number of issues where Democrats don't have anything to add, but libertarians definitely do. If you're talking to the radio audience here, and everyone's listening and hearing you for the first time, what would you say to them about libertarianism? Like, if you had one thing that you wanted to share, or the most important thing about libertarianism that you want to debunk, something that might be untrue, or the truth about it?
I think, speaking like a Reader's Digest type of moment, let's go ahead and just focus on what is the worldview of libertarians, and it's this. When we look at the government, when we look at the state, what is it at the end of the day? Bare knuckles. It is a system of force, violence, and coercion. And if you aren't willing to go hold your neighbor up at gunpoint, go ahead and get something done, whether to pave a road or to pay for somebody else's benefits or something else, if you're not willing to go out there and do it yourself, why would you have the government, which is at the end of the day a violent middleman, go out and do that? If we want a peaceful, prosperous, and respectable society, we have to stop seeing government as this all-being, all-seeing, all-controlling entity that it is, and we need to start seeing our society as, it's our neighbor, it's our friend, it's our family. If you can't get something done yourself, there are other people that can do that. But, you look back at our founding fathers, what they always emphasized. They emphasized civil society, your churches, your congregations, your social institutions, the family. Government was always the last thing you had to go to. Why is it so hard? Why is it so radical to think that we could solve problems without force? And I think if you believe in that, you're halfway there to, potentially having more of a libertarian mindset.
Okay, so Remso, let's get to the nitty-gritty here, which I learned after becoming active in politics and kind of, you get your toe wet. And one of the first things you learn as a Republican is that as much as we talk about limited government, as much as conservatives talk about how they want to be left alone and be individuals, when you start talking about eliminating the library tax or a certain tax on gasoline that's supposed to pay for roads, really any tax you can think of, if you talk about raising the age to retire, gradually lifting that up to reflect longer, lifespan for Americans, you immediately get pushback from Republicans. Like, Republicans are the main ones who will say, well, we can't do that because of that. If we take away that tax on libraries, then people have to pay a fee to go to the library, and that will reduce literacy or what have you. I mean, I've heard some of the most amazing arguments. We can't reduce the tax that we levy on parks here locally in Missouri because the park system needs to be maintained and we need to make sure it's still free. If you put a fee on the parks, then people won't go to them. And the parks are one of the most beautiful benefits of living in Missouri, et cetera, et cetera. It just goes on and on and on. The same people who are screaming about their taxes and wanting government to be limited never want to see any cuts to the programs they like. Where do you come down on that, or how do we convince them otherwise on that?
Everyone, and I'm not saying this to sound rude whatsoever, but everyone has their sacred cow benefit. They all have their sacred cow entitlement. I kind of got my start in the blogosphere as an education reform blogger, and you would not believe the hatred I got from Republicans going after Common Core, going after Head Start, going and advocating for charter schools, more school choice, the Tim Tebow Act. The hatred I got for the Tim Tebow Act was mind-boggling. But you go ahead and you look around and you see what people are able to accomplish themselves. A lot of people look at libertarians and they're like, well, without government intervention, who would build the roads? Last I checked, Domino's is doing a pretty good job at filling the potholes that most community governments aren't willing to spend the time to go fix, despite the fact that they're going to take your tax money anyway, and then they may or may not go out and fix it. If we allowed the government to outlaw parents teaching their children how to walk, and in order to learn how to walk, you had to go to public school, you would have a whole generation of people that did not know how to walk properly, but even if they weren't to go to public school, they wouldn't know what the concept of walking is at all. The thing is that government doesn't work like any other institution. It doesn't work off of profit. It doesn't work off incentive. They don't have to be nice to you. I've never met a single progressive, I've never met a single conservative that said, I don't imagine a world without the DMV or the IRS. And when we play power politics, and you see this whenever there's a government shutdown or anything, it's always, you have to do this or else we're going to shut it down. You have to do this or else people will die. It's always, you have to go with one absolute extreme or another. As a policy person, whenever I worked with people across the aisle on something, whether it was with an organization or when I was working near the Hill, it always came down to this. We can incrementally change something and allow people to see the effects, and once we get there, we can go ahead and, move the needle whichever way it goes. We have to be willing to change things. We have to be willing to reform things, because regardless of who's in power, Donald Trump, and I think he's done a phenomenal job as president, one day Donald Trump won't be in the White House. And we might have a Bernie Sanders. We might have somebody else.
Yeah.
If we want to start making the changes, we have to start doing it in our own neighborhoods, in our own communities, and we have to stop pretending that one person is going to fix all our problems all the time. Or better yet, one party is always going to be consistent. Because I think Republicans, I know conservatives will agree with me on this, Republicans fail sometimes.
Absolutely.
They really screw the pooch.
Well, it's humans. Anytime they're involved, you're going to have some failure and some disappointment. Remso Martinez, author of Stay Away from the Libertarians, thank you so much for joining the show. Really insightful. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Stacey. Take care.
All right. Talk to you again soon. We are Slammin' and Jammin'. We'll be back with more right after this.
A dear sister in the Lord, who is a writer for the AFA Journal, wrote an astonishing article about idols. In this article, she attests to the fact that if we are truly honest with ourselves, we will find things or people whom are more important in our lives than our relationship with God. Let's just say when I read this, I did my own soul searching and found a few. There are several passages in God's word where he tells us to not idolize things or people. Even the very first 2 commandments warns us about idolatry. In 1 John chapter 5, verse 21, John tells us to keep ourselves from idols. Idolatry is sin, and it could be your career, your marriage, your car, including yourself. John Piper says it best. Sin is what you do when your heart is not satisfied with God. How do you get satisfied and excited about God? Refresh your memory of what the Savior of the world did on the cross and ask the Lord to help you make him number one in your life. With a heart for the urban family, I'm today's urban woman, Victory McIntosh. Connect with us more at urbanfamilytalk.com.
Coming next week on The Dwelling Place. Pastor Al Pittman continues to walk us through the Bible, line by line and verse by verse, to let God show us just how timeless his truth is. That's next week on The Dwelling Place.
Please call your senators today. It's time to put an end to the liberals' filibuster. Tell your senators to switch to a majority vote and defund Planned Parenthood now. Call the Capitol Switchboard at 202-224-3121 or go to afaaction.net. Again, call 202-224-3121 3121 and tell your senators to switch to a majority vote and defund Planned Parenthood. Your call will make a difference.
Back to Genesis with Dr. John Morris, geologist and president of the Institute for Creation Research. Dr. Morris, what's the source of natural gas?
Chris, natural gas is a result of a variety of life processes. Even the digestion of your food produces methane gas. Methane gas is also found in volcanic eruptions and in meteorites, so it's evidently a chemical that can form under a variety of conditions. A new theory has been proposed that the huge deposits of methane gas are really the inorganic outgassing of the Earth's interior. These huge pockets of pure methane in many ways don't appear to be life gases with all the impurities that would be there. I lean to such a theory myself. God created this earth for man's good, and methane is a very good part of our existence. It's hard to know for sure, but it wouldn't surprise me from a Back to Genesis perspective.
To learn more about creation, get our free DVD called That's a Fact. Call us at 800-628-7640 and mention the promo code FACT.
Welcome back to Stacy on the Right.
Put it this way. Comey's assumptions were all based on the fact that Hillary Clinton was going to win the presidential election, right? And
right. I mean, that's clear in the report that they all agree that's what they thought.
That's what was going to happen. They knew it was so, and they proceeded. They didn't act like law enforcement people. They acted like people who were caught in this political swirl, and as we see, playing games and sending emails. So the first and most important thing I take away from this is James Comey's ruined, right? This is the full ruination of James Comey. We see now why he wanted to get his book out. We see why he did the aggressive publicity tour. This is horrible for him. And here's Robert Mueller, not a spring chicken, who had basically now, in a sense, had to come out of retirement to save this agent. Not to, I don't want to make it sound too strong, but to undo a lot of the damage that his successor did.
Okay, so that was Chris Stirewalt. He was on Fox News, and I couldn't believe he said that Comey is completely ruined. And the reason why I couldn't believe he said it is because I'd actually thought that late last night, just before I turned in for the evening, I was thinking about this whole thing, the IG report, everything that we've learned. And I thought back over the course of the last year, many times here on the show, we've talked about James Comey. We've played audio clips of him, especially during his never-ending book tour where he was just on every show. I mean, his PR budget must have been so outstanding for him to make some of those hits he was able to get, those full form, long length interviews that he was able to get. It was just, I mean, somebody put out a pretty penny, which was probably his publisher, but it was an amazing feat of publicity for him for the book. And if you guys remember, we were covering on the show that he just kept getting further and further away from the truth. And he was saying things that we could actually verify. That's not exactly true. Like, there were YouTube videos of him saying one thing, and then on the book tour, he's like, I'm not exactly sure I remembered feeling like that at the time. I'm not exactly sure I recall that being what I thought. Perhaps what I thought was, which is interesting because he was talking about his own mind. Like, you'd think he'd be able to remember, when I was handling the Hillary Clinton investigation and I made this statement, or I told the American people this or that, well, what I was thinking was exactly what I said. That's what I thought at the time. But he was revising his history on the investigation and everything he did for the FBI as director in real time in front of us, and we were watching. And so the incredulity that we felt then is now compounded by learning the contents of the IG report. And he's actually, it makes sense because I thought at the time, it's interesting. It seems as if he's almost running against the clock with this book. And he didn't know when the IG report was going to come out because he was no longer in government. He was the former FBI director. So it's not like he could just pick up his desk phone and call over to the Department of Justice and say, what's the expected time frame on the IG report. He wanted to get the book out as quickly as possible, get the publicity tour done, and go as deep into the American psyche as he could with it, get as many books sold as he possibly could, because he knew once the IG report came out, the contradictions would be very obvious for us to see. And it's literally been out for 24 hours, and we now know that his statement that he's not sure if he remembered, I don't I don't actually know if I recall whether or not I knew that Huma Abedin and Anthony Weiner were married to each other. That's a statement that we all, how can you possibly believe that when Huma Abedin was the closest confidant and advisor and longest working employee, continuous employee of Hillary Clinton, and her husband Anthony Weiner not only had the sex scandal beforehand, like after he was in the House, he was an elected member of the House, and then he left, and then he ran for mayor of New York, and he was trying to rehabilitate his image when all of the Carlos Danger direct messages came out. So this is not someone who was famous in a locality, like someone who's done something here locally in St. Louis, but most people across the country don't know who they are. They've never heard the story. It may have been national news, but it wasn't national news like, consistently running over the course of days. Because in order to reach multiple tens of millions of Americans, a news story can't just be the top of the news on one day, because most Americans don't consume news all day, every day. So it has to be in the news for more than one day. It has to have legs, as they say. So the idea that the Weiner story didn't have legs and that it wasn't everywhere, online, Twitter especially, he was a trending topic on Twitter on more than one occasion for days on end. And the fact that Huma Abedin, who the chief problem that most of us had with her before we realized who she was married to because he was involved in scandal, was that she had been accused of having ties through her family to the Muslim Brotherhood. And she worked closely with a sitting senator. And then, obviously Hillary Clinton headed up the State Department. So it was those things that we focused on with Huma Abedin. But it turns out her husband was the real thorn in their side. And Hillary Clinton could have nipped all of that in the bud by simply firing Huma Abedin as soon as any of this stuff appeared. As soon as it appeared, she could have said, I have to let you go. And that is when she would have been separated from the fact that Huma Abedin took home thousands, tens of thousands of emails and copied them from her work laptop to the private laptop that Anthony Weiner used to send the direct messages to the underage girl. Then she would have had clear demarcation. She would have said, I knew there were problems here. That's why I fired her. So, obviously she needs to be prosecuted. But maybe she couldn't do that because Huma Abedin knows where the dead bodies are located. I mean, and I don't mean literal dead bodies. I'm talking about, the problems with the email server and all of that. When you've worked that closely with someone, you know what their weaknesses are and where they don't have good cover for different things that they might have done that are outside of what they're allowed to do. And so all of that plays into this. It's just a really, yes, it all makes sense in a lot of ways, but it's still wrong. There's still so much wrongdoing here that we're looking at. So I'm going to listen to Andy McCarthy, who comes on. He's on television talking about why the IG didn't find political bias. And this is fascinating in and of itself, too. There's a lot to this that really, it would be so riveting to watch as a movie or recurring television program that was fiction, but it's not. It's actual. This is like the real deal, what's happened. And we as the American people have paid for all of this, and people are getting away with, or at least it looks like right now, they're getting away with breaking the law. So it's number 6.
All right, Andy, the overall conclusion, though, of the Inspector General is that if there was political bias, they didn't see evidence it factored into any of the decisions made on the investigation. Does that settle it for you?
No, it really doesn't, because think about how carefully they're wording this, Shannon. I really don't like it when they say there's no evidence, because that means there's no suggestion in the record that bias could have been a factor. And what they're saying here, and it's very carefully done, is that what the IG was evaluating were a series of judgment calls, and they were not going to second-guess people's discretionary judgment because their metric was the decision made irrational, not whether they agreed with it or whether it was the only decision that could have been made under the circumstances. If that's where you're coming from, and you're also saying at the same time there's pervasive evidence that they had bias, they can't rule out the fact that bias may have played in and may actually have been decisive. So what they're actually saying is, we don't have evidence here from which we can conclude for a certainty that bias was what the driving factor was here, but they can't discount it. And for them to continue to say there's no evidence that bias played a role here is just preposterous. That's not what the report says.
So you got that going on. You got, so, I mean, if you listen to the breadth of the coverage about the report, there are some high points that keep being hit, and, you know, with good reason. Look, it sounds as if the IG report is saying there's no bias, but when you read it, like, so in the summary, it says they didn't find that the political bias that the individuals may have demonstrated in their text messages actually impacted the results of any investigations, namely the email investigation into Hillary Clinton's server. But that's not actually exactly what the report shows. In the report, you see where they're really anxious to get off of Hillary Clinton's email investigation and into the Russia collusion investigation. They're not just anxious, they feel like it's a way for them to fix something that they messed up, which was the election. They almost take responsibility for it, as if the determinant in all of our elections as a country, when we elect a president, that the FBI is integral to making sure that we either get the candidate elected that should be elected, or that when they fail, we don't. Isn't that a new concept for you? For me, it is. I was listening. You read what they wrote, you read the text messages, and you think to yourself, this is so foreign, because I'd never considered the FBI to be that integral to our elections. But in their minds, it was, because the investigation was going on. So I've seen some people already. Joe Scarborough, I was tweeting about that this morning. He says, you know, now it's for sure James Comey is to blame for Hillary Clinton losing the election. And I have to really, like, Hillary Clinton sent out a tweet this morning or yesterday evening saying, but my email, just 3 words, but my email. In other words, James Comey was using a Gmail account or something for some of his emails. And she's saying basically, but he was so obsessed with my email. It's a different thing. There's a huge distinction between sending a few emails from work or having to do with work on Gmail. That's a violation. But that is orders of magnitude not as bad as you having a homebrew server that you haven't even secured yourself and changing email classifications. You know, she stripped classifications off of faxes and emails. She did those things. James Comey did not. So, I mean, he's hardly my favorite person, but those are not the same thing. There is a distinction. The Federal Records Act was violated by Hillary Clinton numerous times. The fact that she even has the audacity to try to make the comparison as if she's so aggrieved, she doesn't even believe she lost the election and it's her fault. She knows she lost, but she doesn't think it's her fault. And so whenever Joe Scarborough or some other rhino conservative, Republican, liberal, communist, Bernie Sanders supporter, whatever they might be, comes on television or tweets out some kind of, well, now we know it was Comey's fault. Well, now we know it was the Russians' fault. Well, now we know it was white women's fault. It was young millennial women who didn't vote. It was blacks who didn't turn out. It was, you know, you can go on down the line. She's got somebody she wants to try to tar and feather with her loss, and a lot of her supporters feel the same way. But the fact is, Hillary Clinton didn't lose only because James Comey said that they'd reopen the investigation. It wasn't the Russian ads that were run on Facebook, which it turns out they ran quite a few, but they didn't spend that much on it. She lost because she was a horrible candidate. She lost because back when she had the opportunity as Secretary of State to simply say, Huma, what is my email address as Secretary of State? Okay. And then wall off the other email addresses and run all of her email communications through that, and all of her private emails about her daughter's wedding or any kind of email she might have been sending to Bill about their private interests. She could have had those on a Gmail account or an AOL account. I mean, you guys know how many options there are for email. She could have done that. And had she done that, there wouldn't have been an email investigation and the FBI wouldn't have been involved, and she could have just run a clean campaign. Then Donald Trump couldn't have called her Crooked Hillary. Do you see how that works? She brought this on herself. And so this idea that people keep on, they're just beating it like a dead horse that's been laying out in the sun for a long time, and it stinks. She cannot exonerate herself from the loss of the presidency. She cannot. She may want to place the blame at the feet of others, but at the end of the day, one decision would have made her immune to probably, I'd say, a third to 50% of the criticism that was leveled at her by Donald Trump. He would have had to have attacked her on something else. She gave him the ammunition because she chose incorrectly back when she was the Secretary of State. Now, the good news for her is that she'll never be prosecuted, because then that would open the door to prosecuting President Obama, and he is the Democrats' sacred cow, and they'll never permit that to happen. But in the course of her actions and the ramifications of those actions, she has also opened up others to the kind of scrutiny that they didn't want. WikiLeaks showed us a lot about the Democrats. The Democrats nominating, so millennials wouldn't have had such a huge problem with her if she didn't have the email server issue. If she wasn't such a damaged candidate coming into the race, they wouldn't have been so energized by Bernie Sanders. A lot of problems that a lot of organizations are experiencing right now all trace back to Hillary Clinton's decision to have some server stood up in her bathroom and run all of her classified information through it. It's amazing the tentacles that one decision have grown. And it's her fault. And I'm not sorry about it. I was going to say sorry, but not sorry. So that's hour one. We'll be back with hour two right after this.
Urban Family Talk. Urban Family Talk.
Vice President Mike Pence called the Values Voter Summit the greatest gathering of conservative, pro-family Americans in the nation. The Values Voter Summit in Washington, D.C. is September 21st through the 23rd. Sponsored in part by AFA Action, the summit will encourage and equip you to preserve America's republic. Learn more and register at valuesvotersummit.org. That's valuesvotersummit.org.
Truth, wisdom, empowerment. Urban Family Talk, a ministry of the American Family Association.
American Family News, I'm Rusty Pugh. China is promising a response, with President Trump said to be potentially hours away from announcing tariffs on Chinese goods. Simon Owens reports.
The Chinese Foreign Ministry saying China will respond immediately to defend its legitimate rights if the US takes actions that harm its interests. A spokesperson saying China believes progress has been made in recent talks with the Trump administration about reducing China's trade deficit with the US. But the spokesperson says if tariffs are imposed, the results of those talks will not take effect. Simon Owen, Fox News.
Riders on a roller coaster fell more than 30 feet after it derailed in Daytona Beach. 10 people were injured. Fox 35's Kristen Delgado has the story.
Tourists telling us they had seen that this ride had been closed in the previous days leading up to this accident. Now, we will, of course, confirm that to see if that ride was closed, if it was closed, why it was closed, if something was being fixed, if something was still needing to be fixed in this case. When's the last time this was inspected? There's so many questions that we will try to get those answers to as soon as possible. For now, reporting live in Daytona Beach, Kirsten Delgado, Fox 35 News.
Even though the Obama administration is past history, his influence on LGBT issues remains in Washington. Charlie Butts reports evidence of that is in 2 recent federal grants.
The National Science Foundation has given an LGBT activist, Christina Olson, a $1 million grant to study and encourage transgenderism among children ages 3 to 12. Peter LaBarbera of Americans for Truth About Homosexuality tells AFN the government has been paying for similar studies for years.
These are activists running these studies, and so that's why we would hope that the Trump administration would put an end to these bias projects. We certainly don't want our taxpayer dollars spent on promoting gender rebellion, extreme gender confusion among children.
Earlier this month, the Free Beacon reported the National Institutes of Health is providing nearly $350,000 for a study of the contraceptive habits of lesbians. LaBarbera says it's a truth that LGBT activists don't like to admit that many lesbians do continue mating with the opposite gender. But it illustrates how the entire LGBT movement is confused. They want us to believe they are a special subset of humanity that deserves special protections.
But what it actually is a bunch of people who are involved in sexual immorality, sexual confusion, and the government should really stay out of it. The government should not be promoting this lifestyle or this agenda.
LaBarbera contends government employees spending federal funds for that purpose are a holdover from the Obama administration, still influencing different federal agencies, and should be part of the Clean the Swamp campaign. I'm Charlie Butts.
A conservative legal organization that defends religious freedom and civil liberties is suing an Oregon high school on behalf of a student whose privacy rights were violated.
The defendant in the case, a male student, was using the restroom when he noticed a transgender female enter. The school defended her actions by saying they are required by law to allow transgender students to use bathrooms of the opposite sex. Brad Dacus of the Pacific Justice Institute says that's nonsense.
This is just a classic example of activism attempting to push their viewpoint and their ideology against the will of the people of Oregon at the expense of young people and their privacy being violated.
He says the Institute has filed suit against Sutherland High School, the superintendent and the principal, demanding that they immediately rescind the policy.
If they do not reverse their policy, then we at Pacific Justice Institute will continue this defense in court and as far and as high as necessary to make sure that the basic privacy right of students not to be visually violated is protected.
Dacus says that eventually the Supreme Court will have to decide these kinds of cases, and this potentially could be the case. I'm Bob Kellogg.
For American Family News, I'm Rusty Pugh.
I'm Will Addison, Director of Urban Family Talk. We desire to be a movement of time tellers. In 1 Chronicles 12:32 it says, "The sons of Issachar were men who had understanding of the time, to know what Israel ought to do." In these perilous times, God is raising up a people of discernment who will see, pray, and act. We sound the alarm as watchmen. We cry aloud that God's people may be activated for his service. Join the movement at urbanfamilytalk.com.
Welcome to Stacy on the Right with your host, Stacy Washington.
As I said, we accept the findings of the report and the recommendations. We're doing a number of things on that regard. First, we issued a new media policy that's much stricter and much more clear than what had been in place before. Second, we're going to be doing intensive training on exactly those issues, things like the one that you alluded to. That includes contacts with the media. Third, we're going to make painfully clear to everybody that we won't tolerate noncompliance. And then last, I've asked our OPR to take a hard look at whether or not they think the penalties that exist right now are sufficient to deal with that kind of conduct.
Back when I was young, I was just a loner, sitting on my rooftop, staring at the stars, wondering if someone up in
Welcome back to the show, everybody. So we've got a ton of information for you in hour two. FBI Director Wray outlining the steps that the Bureau has taken to address the leaks, which you just heard. So what we're talking about now is why would everybody at the FBI be forced to take a training class if this is an issue that is really centralized to the people who were working on the Hillary email investigation and those who then went on to work? They kind of cross-pollinated from the Clinton email investigation. They moved right on over to Mueller's team investigating the Russian collusion. So if that's the case, why does everyone need stricter media policy and intensive training? Because this is a way of covering everything without really covering anything. So when he approached the podium and he gave this press conference, I watched it on video afterwards. I didn't watch it live, but when I was watching it, I thought, okay, here's the chance for me to see whether or not the things that people tweet about Director Wray are really true, that he's corrupt, that he's, whatever the case might be. And I'm watching it, and I just got the feeling that his entire reason for coming out there was to defend the FBI. And so at first I thought, wow, he's going to defend the FBI, and then what? And then I realized, well, as the director of the FBI, that's what he should do. I would expect him to make a defense of the FBI and to give them every opportunity to kind of stand up against the scrutiny that they're now under because of this report. Because not every FBI agent is guilty of what has been alleged here. In fact, you can really limit it to the people who sent the text messages and the people that received them, the ones who are involved in the communications. So that's a tiny number of people in comparison to the entire organization. But what I didn't hear was him admitting that, he said, well, some people have to be prosecuted. The people have to be referred. But Strzok still works for the FBI, does he not? Why is he still employed? Sorry, what's going on there? So you've got all of this going on. And then you have Representative Jordan, who I'm aware that there's a campaign in the background for Representative Jordan to be the replacement for Paul Ryan once he serves out his term. And Jordan has been very strong. We have really enjoyed playing clips of him on the program. He's been one of those individuals that he seems very strong on the issues. And I'm hesitant to get too excited about him because remember how strong Paul Ryan was on the issues? And then he went into leadership, and then I'm not sure who that guy is that we've been dealing with for the past couple of years. But before that, he was a budget hawk and he was really conservative. Now he's like all about amnesty and open borders, et cetera, et cetera. It's weird. So Representative Jordan went on TV to talk about the IG report and how they found bias. And I think he seems like he's the one for the job, the right tool for the job. But we'll see. It's number 2.
As I said,
what's your reaction to the conclusions here?
Yeah, Director Wray is just not accurate, because in the report itself it says we do not have confidence that Strzok's decision was free from bias. What are they referring to? They're referring to Peter Strzok at the end of the Clinton investigation saying let's focus on Russia and not looking at Anthony Weiner's laptop and stuff that relates to the Clinton investigation. And why is that important, Lou? Because the one text message that was so explosive in this report is the one where Peter Strzok says, we'll stop President Trump from being president. We'll stop him. That to me is amazing. So that's the context, and understand that. So for Director Wray to say that there was this was free from bias, that is just not accurate. Mr. Horowitz himself said we do not have confidence that Strzok's decision was free from bias. In other words, that's like saying this guy had an agenda, and it's obvious to anyone who looks at this in the right way.
And he's right. It is obvious to anyone who. If you're not a partisan, clearly there was coordination here. There was work done on behalf of these FBI agents together in unison, on purpose, intentionally, with a certain intent as their goal. They had goals. They had something they wanted to see happen. They wanted to see Hillary Clinton elected, and when she wasn't, they wanted to see Donald Trump prevented from being the president, and when he was the president, they wanted to see him removed. And that is all they've been working on. Not the entire FBI, but them. And I want to connect up some dots here. So, in a number of these recent terror attacks, the attack on the Pulse nightclub, which it turns out the shooter at the Pulse nightclub, who was of Muslim extraction, and he did it as an act of terror. It turns out he didn't do it because it was a gay nightclub. In fact, while he was in the nightclub, just before he opened fire on the group, he asked one of the security guards where all of the women were. He said, where are all of the women? Why are there only men here? And the bouncer said, there hardly are ever any women in here. Like, there are always just a few women. And then he went, retrieved the firearm, and started shooting the place up. So he didn't shoot it up because it was a gay nightclub. He shot it up because he was doing terrorism. He was interviewed by the FBI. His father was an informant for the FBI. But that's not all. So in other words, the FBI had contact with this individual and failed to apprehend him to prevent him from doing a terror attack that resulted in the deaths of 50 people and the maiming of injuring of many more. Then there's the interview that they had with the shooter at the church. They also interviewed him. There are the tips that were sent in about the Parkland shooter. They had contact with him. Now, any organization is going to have misses. You know, they're not going to catch every single thing. But if you look at the level of effort that was being directed towards getting rid of the president, preventing him from being elected, et cetera, and then you look at the mishaps that have occurred that have resulted in the loss of life of people, human beings here in this country, it doesn't look like the FBI's hands are as clean as possibly we would want them to be. You see what I'm saying there? These things are not happening by themselves. They're happening together. It means something that the FBI had this kind of, it's corruption when career appointees, career officials are working to prevent one person from being elected or working to make sure someone else is elected when their job is investigating crime. That is outside of what they're supposed to do, and it's corrupt for them to be using any form of communication to execute that. We're not talking about people talking about get out the vote drives or we're going to go hand out pamphlets for Hillary in our free time. Did you know that it is actually illegal for FBI agents, if you're driving your FBI-issued vehicle, the vehicle that you use to drive around to investigate whatever you have to do in your FBI work, if you take that vehicle after work and drive to Walgreens to pick up a prescription, that can get you a 30-day suspension. That's illegal. You can't use your FBI-issued vehicle to go pick up your prescriptions at Walgreens. That's how serious they take on-the-job time and the separation between the use of government assets and your private work, your private business, your private time off the job. So if that's the case, if just driving your vehicle to the Walgreens after work instead of parking it and getting in your own car and taking it over to Walgreens is such a major infraction to them, then how are we not seeing the nature of this current investigation's findings for the seriousness that it is? For it is serious that this has happened. And so I was looking at that, you know, over the course of reading and trying to absorb as much as I could about the story, it just became so clear to me that these things are connected. And so I'm not saying that the same agents who are named agents 1 through 5, who are unnamed at this point, or Lisa Page and Peter Strzok, that they're the ones who dropped the ball on the Pulse nightclub and the Parkland shooting. I'm not saying that. But I am saying an organization that has this kind of rotten, stinking behavior up at the head and people who are running a major investigation that is a part of our national news story, part of our national conversation in this country. Everyone's talking about Hillary Clinton's email server and the fact that she's running for president and if they're going to vote for her, if they're not, if they care about it, if they don't. If you got that kind of corruption going on there, no wonder you have the kind of lax response time and lack of investigation on individuals who ended up killing Americans. No wonder. So what do we want? As Americans, we want to see, you know, so Director Wray, he's in his press conference, he talks about these new procedures, how they're going to limit contacts with the media. Well, of course they are. They've already done that. That's already the rule. As has been pointed out, and will continue to be pointed out, they already have rules and procedures in place that govern everything that happened here. The problem is that people knew the rules and they broke them anyway because they felt justified in doing so because they wanted to see Hillary Clinton become the president of the United States. That kind of partisanship has no place in our government. No place in so it doesn't mean you can't be partisan. It doesn't mean you can't be a dyed-in-the-wool Clinton supporter. And why do I keep saying Clinton supporter? Because there weren't any Trump supporters. The IG reviewed millions of documents and didn't find one tweet, one text, one email supporting President Trump. All of it was in support of Hillary Clinton, which means that those people could totally be as partisan as they wanted, but when they walk into the job with their suit on and their FBI badge and they scan into the building, at that moment, they're not Hillary supporters, they're FBI agents and everything that entails. They swear an oath to do work for the FBI in a certain way. They swear to obey the law. Those processes and procedures that are put in place for them have to be followed regardless of their political affiliation. The fact that these people did that means they have to be prosecuted. The same way they would suspend an agent working out in a field office in San Francisco for driving their car to a bunch of different places, their FBI-issued vehicle, all over the place to run errands or take their kids to and from school. They have to be able to prosecute people who've done what these people have done. They have to be held accountable. Otherwise, what? So you train the people. So he makes them sit through training. They sit for an hour, they sit for 2 hours, or maybe it's once a week for the next month, or they're going to sit through, I'll tell you what the training is most likely going to end up being. Someone in the legal department will get together with their training apparatus, because they probably have a department that handles training, and they'll go over all of the attendant rules and regulations. They'll have a memorandum that comes from FBI Director Wray's office about what training needs to be implemented. They'll put together a bunch of training modules, and the FBI agents will be required to have taken those modules on their government-issued laptop, desktop, whatever. They'll log in with their unique ID. They'll watch the slideshow presentation or video or combination thereof, PowerPoints. They will sign their name on a login sheet saying, this is what I completed, all 6 modules by the date, the deadline. And then they'll move on with their jobs. While the module is playing, I mean, you guys, come on. There are no children here. We're talking about grown adults. You can have your work laptop up with the module going and hit advance, or you can hit play and the screens will pass through, and you can be watching it intently and taking notes, or you can be on your phone or one of your other numerous computers working, doing email, finishing grading your child's homework, making doctor's appointments, cooking dinner. This means nothing. The training means nothing. What means something is indictments, prosecutions. That's what has to happen here. Otherwise, all of this was for naught. Investigation for what? When we get back, we have David Almasi, president of National Center. Stay there.
Nearly 1 in 4 pregnancies in America will end in abortion. The Ministry of Preborn provides free ultrasounds for abortion-minded women throughout America. When a mother sees her baby on an ultrasound and hears the baby's heartbeat, she's 80% more likely to keep her baby.
They introduced me to my child for the first time through an ultrasound. I was able to see this life growing inside of me, hear the heartbeat, and nothing else mattered at that point. I wasn't afraid anymore. I got to meet my child for the first time, and it changed everything. I was a mother to be.
Your gift of $140 will cover the cost of 5 ultrasounds. All donations are tax deductible, and 100% of your gift goes to saving babies. To donate, dial pound 250 and say the keyword baby, or donate securely at preborn.com. Your love can save a life.
Hello, this is Bishop Harry Jackson of Hope Christian Church in Beltsville, Maryland. Jesus said you would do greater works than he did. Number 2, he must stop at Bethel. Bethel is a place where covenant and character transformation happened. Bethel was a place in the book of Genesis that Jacob the manipulator, Jacob the supplanter, Jacob the guy that would lie and twist and cheat and perhaps steal. And he lay down in a place where a ladder went between him and heaven. And he saw the angel of God ascending and descending upon the ladder. And in that place, he said, I'm going to pour out oil on the stone and make this stone a pillar. And here I'm going to vow to bring 1/10 of everything I earn. I will call the place called Luz, L-U-Z, I will call it Bethel, the house of God. Luz means almond tree or perverse. It speaks of the place in our character in our lives that we go from our own twistedness, our own iniquity, and that God begins to transform that which is twisted in all of our lives, even if we're believers. And he supplants the twistedness with a God encounter. And in that place where God visits us, it becomes the house of God, and we become the man and the woman of God that we are supposed to be. Join us this Sunday morning at 6251 Annandale Road in Beltsville, or on the web at thehopeconnection.org.
Welcome back to Stacy on the Right.
Welcome back to the program. Thanks for being with us today. Head over to StacyOnTheRight.com and hit the subscribe button. You will be happy that you did. The newsletter is pretty awesome. Right now, it's my pleasure to welcome David Almasi, president of National Center, and also one of the kingpins of our Free Enterprise Project. These guys go around the country to the shareholder meetings and confront these CEOs about the fact that they have lost sight of their true goal as CEOs of publicly held companies, which is to earn a profit for shareholders. David, thanks for joining in today.
Thanks for having me out, Stacey.
All right, so let's talk about your most recent, because you guys have been making major news with this. You and others who work on the project have actually made things happen, like the apology from Joy Behar, which was, brought up at the shareholder meeting for Disney. Mr. Iger actually had to be held accountable for what his employee, on down the line, but still his employee, was saying on national television about Christians. And now we have, again, you're making news with this latest foray.
Yeah, one of the last meetings we're going to go to this shareholder season was me going to Dick's Sporting Goods out in Pittsburgh. And we were calling out their corporate virtue signaling. As your listeners probably know, Dick's has been probably the loudest business in saying that they're going to stop selling AR-15s, they're going to stop selling certain gun accessories, and they've even reportedly put money, my money as an investor, into lobbyists who are going out and working for gun control issues. And this is kind of strange considering the company is still selling guns. Not the AR-15s anymore, but they're still selling guns. And yet, as an investor, I'm hearing that they're trying to cut their nose off by campaigning against their own products.
So to recap for the listeners, David is talking about the decision by Dick's Sporting Goods after the most recent shooting in Parkland, where the children were shot and it was found that the firearm that was used was an AR-15. Dick's Sporting Goods decided to remove the AR-15 from their inventory, and instead of reselling on the manufacturer's market or on the back end to other wholesalers, or simply selling them online from another retailer, they had so many options. They decided to destroy the firearms and then raise the age limit to purchase a firearm in their store, and to kind of take an anti-gun stance, which has hurt their bottom line significantly, and which, by extension, shareholders like you, David.
Exactly. And the thing they kept on saying, the CEO, Ed Stack, was saying to me, like, we know that people are supporting us. We know that people will continue shopping with us because of what we did. And I'm a gun owner, and I support them. I pointed out to him, I reminded him both publicly and privately that in their earnings calls, they could only cite sales were down in their hunting division. They couldn't give any circumstantial evidence even that people are going to the stores and buying because of what they did. And I can certainly expect, knowing some of the people I know that are liberal, they may go and say, I'm going to go shop at Dick's. I'm going to tell all my friends to shop at Dick's. They may go over and they might buy something once. But the next time they want to make a purchase, they're going to look at location, they're going to look at price, they're going to look at what might be available on the web and be more convenient. But they've lost at Dick's, they've lost the hunters. They've lost the gun enthusiasts. They've lost the conservatives who maybe don't even own guns but respect the Second Amendment. And those customers are not going to come back until they change their policy. But what they told me this week was that they're digging in their heels, they're doubling down, and they're not going to change their attitude. They're going to be a store that will not sell AR-15s and other things to their customers. And as such, they've paid a heavy price that may end up having to get them out of the gun business entirely.
So what are they if they don't sell any guns? And hunters and people who buy like coolers, and there's a lot of equipment. If you're in the listening audience and you've never been to a Dick's or a Cabela's or a Bass Pro Shops, what I found the first time I went to one was that there's a whole world out there that I'm not acquainted with. The hunting world. There's so many products for it, and I liken it to my favorite analogy for being an American is because we live in a fixer-upper and we've been remodeling it for over 4 years, is that there was something that was left with the house. It's a pool lounger, and it was missing a screw. And my husband said, take the screw out of the other side, because he was at work. He said, take the screw out of the other side and take it to Lowe's. And they have a screw sizer that hangs on the screw aisle, and you can size the screw up and buy replacements. And so I was like, really? So I took myself on a little field trip, and I went to Lowe's, and I stuck the screw that I had into the screw finder, and I noticed right next to it they had the American screw size, and then they have metric screws, because apparently Europeans use a different measurement on their screws, just like they use, centimeters and we use inches. So I found the screw, and then I used the key next to the screw thing to find the corresponding place in the aisle where the screw that I was looking for was, and then I bought replacement screws, came home, screwed them into the little nuts and bolts that were still there. And I just stopped for a second in the aisle before I walked out. And instead of looking at it the way I normally do, which is I'm so used to going to Lowe's and Home Depot and Costco and Sam's Club and places like that I take it for granted. But I looked up and I saw the goods stacked up into the sky, because, these big box stores are like 3 stories high on the inside. So you look up, you see the goods stacked to the ceiling. You see the back stock that's up there. I saw there's literally millions of screws in this one aisle of the Lowe's. There's an aisle like that at every Lowe's. There's an aisle like that at every Home Depot. And I thought for a second, this is the truest representation of what capitalism is in America, that there is no screw that is made that I cannot buy off the shelf within 5 miles of my home. It doesn't matter what product I have. It could be made in Russia or South Africa somewhere. If I have it and I have the screw, I can take it to the store and find its replacement. This is America. And so what's funny about that is that it works also with the outdoor world, where people who are hunters have all of these things they use, and these sporting goods stores provide them these things so they don't have to order it and wait 2 or 3 weeks. They just walk in with their, I need a wheel for my cooler. I need, a replacement water filter. I need something for the tail end of my boat. I need a special replacement piece for my special fly reel for when I go out on my little, speedboat and I fish, whatever it is that they're looking for. And that includes guns and gun accessories, because people use the guns to hunt deer and turkey, et cetera, et cetera. So why would they take themselves out of such a huge market? I mean, a multi-billion-dollar stateside market where they had a nice share. How can they calculate that to work for their bottom line?
They can't. That's the problem. I listened to their earnings calls. They sat there and said, all we see is that our hunting sector is going to be hurt for the foreseeable future because of what we did on guns. And then they follow up by saying, well, we think we did the right thing. But when they have Dick's has a set of stores, Field and Stream, which serves the hunting community. If those people are angry about what they did with the AR-15s, if they're angry about what they're doing with other accessories and advocacy against guns, those stores are dead in the water and potentially going to have to start closing up some of their properties because of this virtue signaling. That's good for the consumer. That's not good for the employee. That's good for the investor. And it's something I tried to get across to the CEO during the meeting and after the meeting, and it was typical liberal virtue signaling and excuse making. And I mentioned he couldn't put his finger on any way of proving to me that they were getting more customers or they were retaining customers because of what they did. And so then he went to the usual catch-all. I'm doing it for the kids. And at that point, I said, look, if you're doing this for child safety, if you're removing guns from your shelves for child safety, why are you not also removing football equipment until such time that we can have football rules and things that are not going to put kids in harm of brain injuries? And that he went crazy. He said, like, how could you bring that up? I'm like, well, it's a safety issue. There are hundreds of thousands of kids hurt every year playing sports, particularly football. And he's like, oh, I guess next thing you're going to say is we should take down knives. And I'm like, if you want to.
That's his thing to say, not yours. You're not advocating for it. That's his next logical step, not yours.
Yeah, so he basically accused me of being Donald Trump because I was going to bring up knives, I was going to bring up trucks, things that were going to kill kids. But it's a realistic concern that they're going to be hurt, and all customers are going to be hurt by things like extreme sporting equipment, the football equipment. I watched my nephew get hurt pretty bad in lacrosse 2 weeks ago. There are things that really enter for the kids. They got to start thinking, have second thoughts about them if they're going to also have, if they're going to be making the virtue signaling about guns.
Mm. Well, it's a good point. So he was triggered. Your comments triggered him.
Yeah, that's right. He was triggered.
Good job, David. I mean, I'm congratulating you because when they get triggered, the point has been made. That usually the point making is the triggering thing. That's what sends him over the edge. So he doesn't care about that.
Final exchange was that he asked me if I was going to shop at his stores again, and I said, well, probably not. And he threw his hands up in the air and said, fine, and walked away.
Now wait, but you're there not as a shopper. You're there as a shareholder.
I'm there as an investor. I'm someone who wants to get a return on my investment. It doesn't necessarily mean I need to shop there, but certainly I should want to shop there as an investor. But at this point in time, I've got a Dick's at my local shopping mall, but across in one of the other shopping centers, there's a Modell's that I can go to. And, of course, I have a computer sitting a foot away from me that I can use to find pretty much anything else that I want to get.
Yeah, and the other thing is the worst time for him to do this is now when Amazon is eating up all the space. They have so much money that they can do anything they want. Like, I don't know if I reported on this yesterday on the show, David, how they're doing these new, it's like an ice cream truck, but it's a specialty truck that is decorated up and they pump bubbles out of it and music, and they'll sell you something special from the truck. And if you sign up, which I just did yesterday, they'll send you a text message to let you know when the truck is near you, and they'll tell you what they're selling. You can buy it right there on your phone and go pick it up from the truck. And while you're there, with the music and the bubbles, and sometimes they'll have some samples there for you to eat or some free food. Sometimes the truck has free items. You don't have to buy anything. Just go to where the truck is and get the free item. And it's always parked in a shopping plaza, so in front of the Costco, in front of the Dick's Sporting Goods. It's going to yes. So I'm pointing that out to say this is the worst time for him to decide to be like against his bottom line, because Amazon is looking at everything other people are doing and everything they're not doing. And they're like, oh, we could do that. The craziest idea you've ever heard, a ice cream truck concept for grownups. And apparently it's super popular. Like, I'm sitting here, I can't wait for my chance to go. I want to go buy something from the truck too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this is also not the time to get conservatives angry, because conservatives have been on the receiving end of abuse from corporate America and the liberals that are pushing them for a long time. And I think that we finally seen the sleeping beast awaken, and people don't need to go to Dick's Sporting Goods. They don't need to go to certain stores that are turning them off or saying bad things about them and virtue signaling against them. And I think that your Delta, while we're on the gun topic, has said that they've had declining sales because of what happened when breaking ties with the NRA. I believe United has taken it on the chin for breaking with the NRA. People have choices, and now conservatives who have been reticent before about voting with their wallets are going to start doing it because groups like us are challenging these companies and making them have to take a stand. And there's groups like the NRA and the Media Research Center and Second Vote that are telling their followers that they should avoid certain companies that are not operating in their best interests. And
it's not as hard as it was.
Is going to be coming soon.
Yeah, you know, David, it's not as hard as it was. And I want to point out that if you like the retail experience and you don't want to buy the thing online that you know, the equipment, whatever it was, or the gun items online, you can go to Bass Pro Shops. They're actually a conservative organization. Their leadership is conservative, and Bass Pro Shops, like, they have a gun museum in their flagship store, the first store they ever had, which is down in Springfield, Missouri. And that gun museum has, like, guns from Annie Oakley, real Annie Oakley, like, you know, guns from way back when muskets were the thing. They have a complete timeline of the evolution of guns down there. I actually broadcast from there for one of the NRA radio programs on the opening day of that museum. And my kids and I got to walk around and look at the firearms. They're in glass cases. It is a lovely museum, worth the trip if you're ever in Missouri and you're down there. You basically, you're halfway to Branson when you get there, so you might as well go. And it's just an amazing, I mean, you're literally, even if you're not a gun nut like me, you'll be in that museum and you'll be thinking, who knew they made guns that look like art? Some of them are art pieces, and they're old firearms, and they're in the museum there. And so I just point that out to say, if you need the retail experience, Bass Pro Shops is probably your spot. But if you're like me and efficiency is key, you know, online retailers have eaten up whatever space there was between what you could get at Dick's and what you could get online. That is no more. So you can just do whatever you want, and you don't have to worry about shopping at a place where the guy is openly hostile to you even existing, which it sounds like he didn't appreciate you asking him, but you were asking about your investment, which he should have appreciated.
Right. I mean, that's the thing. When you're an investor, when you own stock in the company, they have these shareholder meetings every year. They have to have them, and it's your ability. You have the right to and ask questions and put these CEOs on the spot, or if they're doing something really good, to pat them on the back and make sure that they know that they have your support. And we've done both at the National Center through the FET. We've been trying to bolster companies to adhere to the free market values that make them great, that make them successes. And in these cases, call them out when they're doing things that are antithetical to a sound business model, and in this case, virtue signaling for the left.
Well, I'm glad you're doing that work, and sounds like you triggered him totally, which means a job well done. Congrats. David Almasi, president of National Center, thank you for joining us today. Great to talk to you.
Thanks for having me on.
All right, talk to you again soon. So we'll be back with more right after this. Stay there. This is Just a Minute with Stacey Washington. As if college students aren't already totally triggered, George Washington University hosted a workshop for students and faculty on the unmerited perks and favors showered upon white Christians, which are unavailable to everyone else. The Multicultural Student Services Center wants to teach minority students they are dupes. Meaningless buzzwords like ally, unconscious bias, and microaggression were employed for this purpose. The Bible is very clear that we are indeed privileged to be the beneficiaries of Jesus Christ's great work on the cross. We are also called to suffer with him, which is a privilege. Christianity is open to everyone, period. Wouldn't it be great if GWU got out of the business of oppressor talk and back to teaching higher ed? Because that is what the parents of those students are paying tuition for. I'm Stacey Washington. Find out more at StaceyOnTheRight.com.
Listen to Stacy on the Right with Stacy Washington on Urban Family Talk. She's sharp.
I mean, did you hear that?
Pointed.
Remember that you're not only a Christian on Sunday.
And insightful.
Deception and lies have been accepted as the norm from the Democrats.
But most of all, she's on the right.
That scripture from the Bible, it says the heart of the fool inclines to the left, just kept popping into my mind.
Stacy on the Right. Now heard weekday afternoons from 2 to 4 Central on Urban Family Talk.
Family is an institution set forth by God, one man and one woman for life, with the outflow being children produced by that union. It's obvious to all that there is an attack on the family in our country, and especially on fathers. Whether it's the cycle of sin that persists in our families or the pressure from our government to exclude men from being intimately involved, the strategic battle is on for the souls of men. Join us in the battle to strengthen fatherhood. UrbanFamilyTalk.com.
Why does AFA keep harping on the dangers of the Netflix show 13 Reasons Why? It's because we've looked into the eyes of the mother of a teen suicide victim. Patrice Bright was mom to a normal, happy 14-year-old cheerleader dealing with the challenges any teenager faces. But her outlook on life was apparently darkened after she binge-watched season 1 of 13 Reasons Why. Anna Bright chose to deal with her temporary teen problems with the permanent act of suicide. Several other teens and young adults have made the same choice after watching this show, which glorifies suicide. The American Family Association and others have pointed out the dangers of the program to Netflix. But, apparently motivated by money, Netflix has just released season 2. Our hope is to save teen lives by getting Netflix to pull the series before another tragedy occurs. You can learn more and sign the 13 Reasons Why petition at afa.net.
This is Stacy on the Right on Urban Family Talk.
On these children who are being separated from their families as they come across the border, the Attorney General earlier today said that somehow there's a justification for this in the Bible. Where does it say in the Bible that it's moral to take children away from their mothers?
I'm not aware of the Attorney General's comments or what he would be referencing. I can say that it is very biblical to enforce the law. That is actually repeated a number of times throughout the Bible. However, this hold on, Jim, if you'll let me finish. Again, I'm not going to comment on the attorney's specific comments that I haven't seen. That's not what I said, and I know it's hard for you to understand. Even short sentences, I guess, but and please don't take my words out of context. But the separation of illegal alien families is the product of the same legal loopholes that Democrats refuse to close, and these laws are the same that have been on the books for over a decade, and the president is simply enforcing them.
Policy to take children away from their parents. Can
It's
you
a
imagine
moral
the horror
policy
that
to
these children
follow
must
and
be going
enforce the
through
law.
when they come across the
Yeah.
border, they're with their parents, and
Yeah.
then suddenly they're pulled away from their parents? Why is the government doing this?
Because it's the law, and that's what the law states. And the law,
it is.
You're right, it doesn't have to be the law, and the president has actually called on Democrats in Congress to fix those loopholes. The Democrats have failed to come to the table, failed to help this president close these loopholes and fix this problem. We don't want this to be a problem. The president has tried to address it a number of occasions. We've laid out a proposal, and Democrats simply refuse to do their job and fix the problem.
So welcome back to the show. Stacy Washington, host of Stacy on the Right, here on American Family Radio and Urban Family Talk. Have you ever heard any one of those reporters say, oh, come on, Jim, you just insulted Sarah? Come on, this one or that one. Don't yell at her. Let her finish her statement. They never defend Sarah Huckabee Sanders, but someone had the audacity to try to defend Jim Acosta, who is a routine offender in that room, someone who shouldn't have a press pass because she said maybe you can't understand short sentences. Oh, so while the outrage meter is up high, let's go ahead and address this whole thing with Kathy Griffin attacking Kevin Hart. So if you're not on Twitter, God bless you because you're living your best life. But for the rest of us who are, we saw that Kathy Griffin was in an interview. She had this USA Today interview. She's trying to rejuvenate her career. She's learned nothing from holding up a representation of the decapitated head of the president of the United States. She's learned nothing from what happened to her for that. She says, you know, if you come to see my show because she's promoting this. She wants to go back on tour, and she wants to have sold out audiences and, play venues. And this is what comedians do. She's telling people that might be thinking about buying her tickets, hey, you know what? If you come see my show, I'm going to talk about how much I hate Donald Trump, and that's a part of the show. So you need to be ready to hear it. She described her deeply partisan jokes as a necessity. She has to do them in today's political climate. This is according to her. But then, instead of just owning her own madness and saying, if you want crazy, if you have Trump derangement syndrome, come see me. I have it too. I'll make you laugh, or I'll make you wish you were laughing. She says, the problem is, here's the quote. And look, if you want to not hear about Trump at all, go see Kevin Hart, as if he needs her endorsement. He doesn't even mention Trump. I personally think that's a female anatomy move because he's a black man, but I guess he's selling more tickets than I ever will. So here's what I have to say to Kathy Griffin about that. Yes, he is. If you heard him voice over that deranged bunny rabbit in that cartoon movie, and you're like me, when I want to laugh, if I want to laugh instantly, mindlessly, I just go to YouTube and I type in Kevin Hart as the bunny rabbit, and clips of him as that bunny come up, and I watch it and I giggle like a maniac and then go on about my business. Anyone who can make me do that, every time he makes a movie, I'm going to go see it. In his movies, he's very clean. Now, I know in his comedy, he uses a lot of profanity, pretty typical, but that's not for me. His comedy routine is not for me. But these movies with the cartoons that are family friendly, that me and my husband and the kids can watch together, absolutely. Have we ever said, oh, you know what, kids, we need to watch some Kathy Griffin? No, and we never will, because she's not talented. So while she's still on the D list, which was the name of her reality show, by the way, Kevin Hart is on the A list. His trajectory is unlimited. He's in the stratosphere right now, earning more money than ever. He likes to say he's the hardest working man, hardest working comedian. And he likes to work hard because everybody wants to be rich, but nobody wants to do the work. That's actually on his Twitter feed, by the way. That man is interested in selling movie tickets, selling tickets to his shows. And he understands that there's his comedy shows where he can do the profanity, but he stays away from the politics. And do you know why? Because he respects greenbacks. Now, I always say to people who they're okay with mistreating their employees, you may mistreat a person because they look a certain way, act a certain way, whatever your bias is, but their money is still green. Their credit card still swipes. If you don't want me to swipe my credit card at your store, I'll go swipe it somewhere else. There's a store here in St. Louis that I absolutely love. But when I would go in there, the women in that store would not treat me properly. And so I haven't shopped there, and I'm coming up on a year. Does that matter to them? Maybe not. But it matters to me because I can put my money someplace else where people are going to be nice to me in the store. They don't have to follow me around and carry my purse, but I don't want them treating me like dirt. They're not going to get my money if they do that. And that's what Kathy Griffin does to the people who listen to her comedy shows. She treats them like dirt. She dumps off all of her angry feelings. She treats it like a psychotherapy session, only she's not paying them. They're paying her. Why would anybody go back for more of that? And the worst thing about what she says here, I really think it's a female anatomy move because he's a black man. How dare she? She's not a black man. How dare she dictate what he has to do because he's black? You want me to tell you why? Because she's a liberal. And liberals think they own black people. It's just as if the actual physical slavery that existed when slavery was the law in this country still exists, only now it's slavery of the mind. And when blacks don't come to heel and obey the democratic orthodoxy, they have to be publicly smacked verbally. They have to be told to get in their place. And this is the equivalent of Kathy Griffin saying, I'm your overseer, Kevin Hart. Get in your place. Your place is to criticize Donald Trump because he's a racist and you're black. And you have a huge platform and you're not doing it and you're not taking the licks like I am. And so I want to call you out. And every time you hear that, I want you to hear that metaphorical crack of the whip because it is a actual thought process that she's trying to exact upon him. And the fact that he's living freely and he doesn't seem to care about Donald Trump, the fact that most of us don't know if he loves or hates Donald Trump, that's the point. I don't want to know what entertainers think about our elected officials. Because if I wanted to know what people think about elected officials, I will go find a politician or a political commentator, a pundit, a talking head, an author, someone who spent time researching, someone who holds the opposing view, but I respect them anyway, and I'll get that information from them. But when I'm looking for comedy or somebody to voice over cartoons, I'm not interested in what their politics are. Kevin Hart seems to understand that, and he's interested in making money, being successful. And what Kathy Griffin should do, instead of hating on him and getting out her liberal overseer whip of authority, she should actually just take some time off and sit at home and get some therapy, get right within herself, like herself, and then start writing some real comedy, which, I'm sorry, but it takes a lot of work. It takes work to be successful at being a comedian. There are a lot of people who are naturally funny, but naturally funny won't get you on huge stages with enormous sold-out crowds, and it won't make you famous. She lists in her bio that she's written I can't say that on the air, 2-time Emmy and Grammy Award-winning comedian, 2-time New York Times bestselling author, 23 TV specials. So with all that under her belt, she shouldn't have to be lobbing verbal bombs at someone who's way more successful than she is. She shouldn't have to do that. But she did. And it makes her a loser. So every time you hear a Democrat talking about how some black person should be doing this or that, remember, the Democrats are the ones who say that Donald Trump is a racist. They say that I hate myself because I'm not a Democrat. The Democrats are the ones that are constantly beating black people over the head, telling them what they have to think, what they have to believe, how they have to talk, what they have to violate that's biblical, that they're going to church on Sundays, but Monday through Saturday they have to believe all this democratic orthodoxy that flies in the face of what the Bible says. It's not Republicans who are telling black people to do that. It's Democrats. And every time they do it, I want you to think about the overseer's whip. You can hear it cracking every time Kathy Griffin opens her mouth to talk about Kevin Hart. She actually thinks she owns him and his ideas, and that at her direction, he should change his comedy routines and bend to her will because she's a liberal and she's taken one for the team and he's black. And if that doesn't enrage you and incense you and make you absolutely sure that you don't want someone trying to control what you think, then you're not paying attention. You should be outraged. I don't care what kind of tan you're sporting, permanent, no tan, in between. Every person should bristle at the idea that in America, one person of a political ideology feels they have control over some person. I don't even know if Kathy Griffin has ever met Kevin Hart. And here's the cake taker about Kathy Griffin. If I were to ever meet her and say, I'm on a show called Stacey on the Right, she would ask me, does that mean you're on the right side of the political aisle? And then she'd say I'm an Uncle Tom, that I hate myself. She'd call me the female anatomy. She'd say that I am acting to hurt black people by supporting Republicans. And she would feel justified in saying all of that because as a Democrat, she has every right to lecture me as a black person about how I think, what I feel, what I do for my work, all of that stuff. She absolutely would feel justified in doing that. Now, she would absolutely receive a verbal tongue lashing back, and she would be instantly educated about how wrong she is, thinking she can control other people's minds. But it wouldn't make a difference to her because she feels justification and validation in being a Democrat that she can tell black people how to think and how to live. And that's why she'll be sitting at home on the weekend, or she'll be playing a show that's not even close to sold out, while Kevin Hart is working on his next movie project and earning tens of millions of dollars for it. The difference is he's worried about himself and she's worried about controlling black people. And that's a recipe for disaster. So I want to get to, before the end of the show today, because it's Friday and we have such heavy news, like so much news. And I won't get to everything, but we'll hold some of this over for Monday. So one of the news stories that is not reaching out because of the IG report, but it is huge, is the immigration compromise that has amnesty for the Dreamers and billions for the wall. So remember, Donald Trump said he was willing to sign almost anything for the Dreamers as long as he got the $25 billion he needs to erect the wall on the southern border. That was a deal I thought the Democrats couldn't pass up. They have been taking a beating in the wars for advertising, because the Republicans have already taken off and said, look, Democrats don't care about y'all. They don't care about immigrants. They don't care about illegal immigrants, because they had a chance to save the DACA recipients and they didn't take it. So now they're trying to craft something, although it's not the Democrats, it's the Republicans, so that they can get this story about children of illegal aliens being ripped from them out of the news. It's a total lily-livered move, but they're going for it. So you've got breaking news today. The Associated Press tweeted out, actually they tweeted it yesterday, House GOP draft immigration bill includes visas for dreamers and other immigrants and a $25 billion for the border wall. The visas would be renewables. The people who receive them would have to have been in the country for 10 years and have been under the age of 16 when they were brought in. But the number of people who would be eligible under this particular proposal is 3 times the number. So 3 times, basically 9 million people would be eligible under this thing than the original number that were going to be eligible under the previous proposal, which allowed for about 3,700 illegal aliens to have something. So the child immigrants would be, this bill would outlaw separating children from their parents when crossing the border illegally. It would put $25 billion towards Trump's wall along the southern border, as well as other border security measures. Asylum it would be harder for asylum claims to be approved, requiring officials to determine that the claims of the asylum seekers are true. National Guard would be authorized to assist in border security, including building the barriers themselves. And family migration, this proposal eliminates green card programs for married children of U.S. citizens as well as siblings of U.S. adult citizens, transferring those 88,400 green cards to a new merit-based program. The diversity lottery would be eliminated, saving 55,000 visas towards the merit-based program, and it would eliminate per-country caps for employment-based green cards. My gut tells me the Democrats will not go for this because it's too much like the original 3-pillar deal that President Trump proposed. But it is actually kind of genius to put it forward to get it on the record right before the campaign season fully develops out. So much more to share. But guess what? It's the weekend. I'm checking out of this thing. God bless you. Great to be with you. See you on Monday.